What's up, y'all? This is not the typical TNA review, but I didn't want to leave y'all reviewless. I don't know if that's a word, but I just made it a word. We got to talk about TNA Impact from this past week. Sacrifice is about 2.5 weeks away, and I think this week's episode of TNA Impact really set up the foundation for Sacrifice, and I feel like this could be one of the best TNA specials that we have had in a long time. And that's not really saying a lot because every TNA special really hits in a different way, but the way they're building up Sacrifice, man, you could call Sacrifice maybe a Big Four pay-per-view if you wanted to for TNA, but this special is really going to be good. Let's start with Mike Santana. So Mike Santana is really one of the top stars in TNA wrestling. And at this point, I feel like he needs to be in that world title picture. But every time he gets close to that world title picture, there's a roadblock in his way. So he beat Josh Alexander, and I thought after he beat Josh Alexander and the torch was kind of passed, that he was going to move on to Joe Hendry. But then immediately after beating Josh Alexander on the live episode of TNA Impact back in January, Mustafa Ali interrupted him, and he had said that he had officially signed with TNA Wrestling. So now if we jump ship just a little bit, now we're in the midst of a Mustafa Ali and Mike Santana feud. Another roadblock to getting him to the world title picture. And on this week's episode of TNA Impact, Mike Santana faced Ora Mensah in what I thought was a great match. Mike Santana picking up the win and picking up the momentum as he heads to this big match with Mustafa Ali whenever that takes place. It hasn't been announced for Sacrifice. It could be announced for Rebellion. We still have Unbreakable on the horizon. So we got to be seated for Mike Santana versus Mustafa Ali. And then we had the massive main event. We had the massive main event with Matt and Jeff Hardy teaming with Obafemi to take on the System with Moose. I don't know why I said with Moose, but I just feel like it brings more oomph to the name of the group than the System. But excellent match. Hands down. There's not much to say here. We got Moose and Oba going at it for the NXT title in a couple of weeks. It's just insane. It is just insane right now in TNA wrestling. On this week's episode of TNA Impact, we also got Tessa Blanchard. Tessa Blanchard was either going to have to wrestle or she would be fired from TNA Wrestling. She did wrestle. She wrestled some local talent. She won, but there was a backstage altercation with Tessa Blanchard and Lei Ying Lee, formerly known as Xia Li in WWE, and that match has been made official at Sacrifice. Tessa Blanchard will be taking on Lei Ying Lee in some singles action. I'm kind of excited for this match, and I'm also excited for Lei Ying Lee finally getting that spotlight that I think she really should have gotten in WWE. TNA is giving to her right now. Steve Maclin is kind of in a weird place at this point. Steve Maclin trusted Eric Young. Eric Young is the new leader of the Northern Armory after Josh Alexander stepped away from TNA. Alexander was the old leader of the Northern Armory, and the Northern Armory had heat with Steve Maclin for months, with Eric Young actually being the savior for Steve Maclin. We even had some nice video packages of Steve Maclin struggling in his own mind to trust Eric Young. So now Eric Young is this huge leader of the Northern Armory, and Steve Maclin is out here out to dry, left alone. Now Steve Maclin can work alone because Steve Maclin is that guy. So on this week's episode of TNA Impact, Steve Maclin took on Casey Navarro, which was another excellent match from TNA. Casey Navarro, up and comer. He is in a tag team with AJ Francis with First Class. So seeing this match was great, but after the match, you just saw the Northern Armory stare Steve Maclin down. So we're far from the end of Steve Maclin versus Eric Young in the Northern Armory. I'm excited to see where this goes. I feel like this was just a burner match on this week's episode of TNA Impact. It was fairly quick, and I think it was won by Frankie Kazarian, but Ace Austin and the Rascals are in a feud with Wesley from NXT and Tyson and Tyreek. So at this point, this was a burn-off match as we get closer to Sacrifice when that big 6-person tag team match happens. It will be Ace Austin and the Rascals versus Wesley, Tyson, and Tyreek from NXT. So this was Very quick, very subtle, but I love that Ace Austin right now is on this singles run. He's supporting his brother Chris Bay, who was injured after the Bound for Glory tapings in October. So Ace Austin is really trying to prove his point and prove it well in TNA. And this is not the first time Ace Austin has been on a singles run in TNA, but right now I think it feels very, very special because he's doing this for Chris Bay. We got to talk about the Knockouts tag team title match. We got to talk about it. So the stipulation of this match, whoever wins obviously will win the tag team championships. Whoever loses will have to be the personal concierge for the opposite tag team. This match was phenomenal. And I really wanted to call it the best match of the night until we got that banger of a main event. But let me tell you something about Danny Luna, who is one half of the tag team champions with Jody Threat Spitfire. Danny Luna is the future of the Knockouts division. Danny Luna is a future TNA Knockouts World Champion. The strength in that match that she showed was on par with some of the best, like Jordan Grace. Danny Luna is great. Jody Threat is great as well. Jody Threat is like, Danny Luna is like the quiet storm. Jody Threat is literally like the one-headed crazy monster in this tag team. She's all over the place and they work well together. And then we got Heather and Ash by Elegance. Everybody knows Ash by Elegance from WWE as Dana Brooke. And then Heather Reckless came into TNA and they repackaged her as Heather by Elegance, forming a tag team with Ash by Elegance. And since Ash by Elegance joined TNA Wrestling, she has been on a roll and hasn't stopped. And I know gold is in her future, but she has had excellent matches with a lot of the knockouts in that division. And this was no different in this tag team match. Every single one of the knockouts in this tag team match delivered, and it was excellent. Now, Spitfire did retain the Knockouts Tag Team Championships, so that means Heather and Ash are the personal concierge for 24 hours to Spitfire, which they did show last night on TNA Impact as well. The start of it, it was hilarious. It was funny, but I know there's only 2 Knockouts tag teams in the division. We got to get more, but I really do enjoy this feud with these 4 women. I think it has been great. I already talked about the main event. That was the first thing I talked about, but I want to talk about, lastly, Mance Warner versus Sami Callihan. So Mance Warner showed up on the live episode of TNA Impact back in January as the mystery number 23. He attacked Sami Callihan. They have been in a feud ever since. And it hasn't been a feud of words. It has been a feud of fight, fight, fight. Backstage brawls, in-ring brawls. Whatever you can name it, they were doing it. So we thought this week's episode of TNA Impact, we would finally get the match. But that broke down very, very quickly. So Santino came out and said that at Sacrifice, another huge match being made at Sacrifice, that Mance Warner will be taking on Sami Callihan in a street fight. I'm seated for this. This is really the first time I've seen Mance Warner before, so that means I got to go do some research and see some of his old matches, but I'm really interested to what he brings to TNA. I'm interested in his attitude and his presence in TNA and how it's going to make a difference as we charge towards Sacrifice, as we charge to his full career in TNA Wrestling. I want to end this briefly by talking about the huge news that came out of TNA. Moose called out Jeff Hardy because Jeff Hardy has pinned Moose twice. So it's going down at Sacrifice. Moose will be defending the X Division Championship against Jeff Hardy in a freaking ladder match. When I tell you I'm excited, when I tell you the little kid inside of me is ready for Sacrifice, Sacrifice is going to be a good TNA monthly special on the TNA Plus app and on Triller TV. I dare you to go check it out. It's happening March 14th, 8 p.m. on TNA Plus, on Triller TV. Is going to be good.